Hello, and welcome to a managerial special from the Unsport Podcast. I'm Craig Savage, and with me, as always, is Mr. Daniel Cody. Today, we're talking about Cardiff City, and it was quite inevitable. Mick McCarthy and Terry Connor have been sacked by Cardiff City Football Club. Steve Morrison and Tom Ranzol will oversee first-team duties until further notice. Let's start off with the initial reaction, because they lost 2-0 to Middlesbrough today. Not surprised, are we?
No, I think for the last few prediction shows, we've been hinting it might be after this game, and it's finally come. I know the statement says mutual consent, but you're absolutely right to say they were sacked, because that is exactly what's happened there. It's a very strange situation. We, at the start of the season, had quite a lot of hope for Cardiff. You predicting them to be in and around the playoff mix, me predicting them to be in the promotion mix. And it's just fallen flat. They're not scoring goals. That brilliant defence they had at the end of last season under Mick McCarthy's not there. And when you lose 8 in a row in a championship, for whatever reasons and whatever mitigating factors, you're going to find it hard to hang on to your job. And as has proven the case again here.
Let's start off when he arrived back in January, and it started ever so well.
They were really good towards the end of last season, and we mentioned it. We almost couldn't predict them to lose because they barely conceded a goal. They had a brilliant foundation. They had good, big, solid, experienced centre halves. It was a classic Mick McCarthy team. You're never going to get the most expansive and exciting football watching a Mick McCarthy side, but you're always going to get an effective one, as we saw at Sunderland, Wolves, Republic of Ireland, even Ipswich to an extent, given the restraints financially. But the difference between that and this season has been so bizarre. And looking into it a bit more, I think we can see some of the reasons for it. And obviously the start of the season hasn't been helped by new signing James Collins not scoring. Kiefer Moore's been out of the goals and obviously had COVID at the start of the year, had a big summer with Wales at the Euros and was linked with a deadline day move. But defensively, the way they've started to collapse in a lot of games this season has been probably the scariest thing. But I mean, even this season didn't start that badly, to be fair, did it?
No, and they obviously got away with a couple of late equalisers, and obviously we've got worrying fingers. Aidan Flint is the top goal scorer at the moment for Cardiff City, and he's your centre half, very worrying. But these run of 8 straight defeats, obviously, yeah, it's the worst in Cardiff City history. But the worst thing about it, as you just alluded to, is only 1 goal scored.
No first half goals all season, which I didn't realise at the first few games of the season. It was only a couple of weeks ago when that stat popped up. As you mentioned, even when they were getting those points earlier in the season, maybe it was a little bit deceptive. The 2 late Aidan Flint goals against Peterborough away from home in what was otherwise a poor performance being a particular one. They nicked a second half comeback against Forest when Forest were in complete disarray. And after that, they've gone on a horrid run. And I guess it's not the fact they've been losing games to an extent, is it? It's 4 or 5 of those. 5 of them have been by more than 1 goal, which is a sign that they're not in the game too much. The only thing I do want to point out, though, Craig, despite the fact they've only scored 1 in 8, is their expected goals for is still higher than their expected goals against this season, which I just found a hilarious stat and probably says more about expected goals than Cardiff performances. And I know they haven't played good football, but they've still been taking over 13 shots a game on average. I mean, that ridiculous one against Reading when they had 27 shots and lost 1-0 at home. It's just a lot of players out of form at the wrong time. I didn't quite agree with the tactical shape playing the back 3 for most of the season when they could have put the 2 up front together and really had a go at it, particularly towards the end. There's a lot of things that have gone wrong. Form of strikers, maybe not having the strength in midfield, which is something I probably ignored in the predictions in pre-season, and defenders that are woefully out of form. All 3 of those put together is a pretty catastrophic mix, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if you look at their starting lineup for today's game, Morrison, Moore and Nelson on the bench for Cardiff City, you kind of think that they really lost the game looking at that. Obviously, they had Harry Wilson on loan last season. They lost that creativity of scoring goals as well. So it just doesn't make any sense on how Mick McCarthy's gone from that to where they are now, sitting 21st in the championship, only a couple of points off outside the relegation zone.
Yeah, it's a really weird situation. I mean, I'll be honest and say I got a bit too carried away with the signings in the summer, particularly the ones up front. I thought Collins and Moore would be a shoo-in to play together. The wide areas, particularly with Giles and that, they get balls in and they be effective. But they are missing that creative spark in midfield. I think they're missing a real sort of a ball buster, a ball winner in midfield. Marlon Pack's a decent footballer, but they haven't really got those ball winners. And they've been relying on youngsters like Cowell to come in and try and produce the goods for them. And maybe they're just not championship ready in the middle of the park, where the game is often accused of being won and lost. So I feel Cardiff have got the potential in the squad to improve with the right manager and the right tactics. But at the moment, it does look some way off. And it's going to be one hell of a job of Steve Morison for now and whoever comes in permanently to try and lift the confidence off the floor.
Yeah, and obviously Steve Morison's taking charge of his first game. They're away to Stoke City, and it's probably not the place you really want to go to.
No, considering Stoke's only home defeat was their last game against Bournemouth, and that was a very narrow defeat. It's been a tough one for Cardiff. And the reason I was surprised about the timing of it is because obviously they've had a couple of games in the last week where maybe you would have expected them to get results, and maybe it was time for a change just before that, considering we'd had an international break as well. I think we half expected it to be during the last international break. And for Steve Morison or whoever's next, I mean, the 3 games in a week from next weekend, Stoke away, then QPR at home, who are very good going forward against a shaky defence at the minute, and then at home to Huddersfield as well, who have had a good start to the season. You just think it could be a very difficult few weeks, and Cardiff could be left in a relegation zone after that, the way they are at the moment, sitting in 21st place. The good news, I guess, is after the next international break, if they can get a good manager in place and working on the training ground by then, they come back with Preston and Hull, which are 2 probably must-win games in the bottom half. But you'll be delighted because my prediction of Cardiff winning the league is certainly not going to happen now, is it?
Absolutely not. But you never know. The championship works in mysterious ways. Right, so let's look to the future. Cardiff City obviously need a new head coach or manager. We have heard that Chris Wilder was at the Fulham game in midweek. Surely he's got to be favourite.
Yeah, he should be, and he is heavy favourite, obviously, in the market at the moment. The one thing that does concern me, particularly on the Wilder front, is obviously the Cardiff board have been quite open in talking about they haven't really got any transfer budget. They haven't got any money to spend in January, which leaves a new manager working with the loan market and maybe free agents or very cheap deals from the lower leagues. And that was sort of the strategy a little bit in the summer too. I just wonder if Chris Wilder, after the problems he had at Sheffield United, is going to walk into that situation. I mean, Vincent Tan in his time at Cardiff has had a very large reputation for doing the wrong thing a lot of the time, I think it's fair to say. Even in the last few weeks with McCarthy, talks about the chief executive and the chairman talking to fans about what they were going to do next without actually having the formal conversations in the club. It's a sad thing to say with a club that even today was phenomenally supported at home in a terrible situation, but it's a club that maybe off the pitch has just as many problems as on it, and perhaps isn't the most appealing to some managers chasing top championship jobs. Having said that, the potential of the club is huge. The fan base is incredible. I mean, we went there for the Luton game when they first came down from the Premier League, and it's a very good atmosphere, even though they were level and chasing the game late on. Chris Wilder would be the best manager for me. I think he's the right man for the job. I think they will end up with a cheaper option because I don't think they'll be able to afford what Wilder wants or what he wants to do in the market. Looking at the rest of the next favourites, obviously Steve Morison's up there. Neil Harris, weirdly, a second favourite, which we found a bit bizarre given the way or the circumstances in which he left the club. And then you've got sort of 1 or 2 odd names that I quite like the sound of. So Michael Flynn, obviously being a Welsh boy, I think he's a really good shout. Did a wonderful job with Newport. Again, under pretty financial restraints, built a good team ethos, a side that could rise to the big occasion. But it's a massive risk when you're in a relegation battle. And yes, that might be all they can afford, but it's one hell of a risk. If you go down to League One, the financial cost is more than paying Wilder a little bit more. The likes of Pardew and Alex Neil are in there. Craig Bellamy's been mentioned a little bit. And going a bit further down, Tony Pulis being another Welsh one that's come up as the sort of saviour. But will they take that approach after Mick McCarthy with a very similar style? I don't think so. I'm going to say, Craig, Wilder will price them out from what he wants, both wage-wise and in the transfer market, and it will be Morison or Flynn. If Morison has a good caretaker stint, I think he'll get the job.
I don't think it'll be Morison. Flynn. I think with Flynn, it's a massive step up from League Two. I don't really see it being Michael Flynn. I think Michael Flynn will probably need a League One job first. Chris Wilder is obviously the safe bet, and Steve Bruce available as well.
You say that, Craig. He's won 4 championship promotions. I mean, there's worse.
He knows how to get teams up. He knows how to get teams up. So don't mug off Steve Bruce. I know, obviously, we're going to cover other Welsh connections. Mark Hughes, probably another name. Obviously, he's never going to take it. I'm just giving Welsh names here. Mark Hughes, probably Nathan Jones. Nathan Jones is obviously a Welshman and obviously a candidate. And he's not leaving Luton. Let's be honest. He will never leave Luton again, like what he did in the past. But yeah, I think for me, it has to be Chrissy Wilder. If it is Chris Wilder, how do you see Cardiff panning out for the rest of the season?
Look, I think Cardiff will stay up regardless, as long as the off-the-pitch trouble doesn't boil over into EFL charges or administration or any of that. I don't think it's going to be an easy season now, because without a good loan player from midfield, perhaps in January, I think there's potentially a bit of trouble on the cards. But the truth is, Craig, I mean, I've just come back from Luton Hold State. Hull are going to get relegated. I'm sorry. There's no doubt in that. Derby are virtually doomed, despite doing really well on the pitch, because they'll lose further points. We've got the likes of Reading, who might get points deducted. Barnsley in disarray. Could Mick McCarthy end up back in Yorkshire in a couple of weeks? We'll wait and see. But I think there's too many poor teams for Cardiff to go down. But that's been said many times about many teams who have ended up getting relegated. I think Cardiff will be mid-table, probably top half of the bottom half. But we've seen with Nottingham Forest, Craig, manager comes in and wins 6 games and they'll be playoff contenders again. So I think they'll be fine, but I think just a consolidating mid-table season.
And one final question for me is this the end of Mick McCarthy's managerial career?
I think he might be at Barnsley in a month's time.
You heard it here first, Yorkshire, from the Honest Football Podcast. Mick McCarthy, the Barnsley confirmed. And that is our reaction to Mick McCarthy sacking from Cardiff City. Do you agree with us or disagree with us? Let us know your thoughts, Cardiff City fans, on the sacking of Mick McCarthy. Was it the right decision? Was it the wrong decision? And who you think will be the next Cardiff City manager? While you're down there, give this video a like, subscribe to the Honest Football Podcast, and you can follow us on Twitter at Honest Football 3. And we'll see you next time.